Hey, welcome back. Formalizing block and match pair designs, and then I'm going to guess the quiz is somewhere in your future. So for block pair, or for block, excuse me, the group of experimental units are known to have some sort of similar characteristic. Okay, so each block is made up of people or things with like characteristics. And then for the randomized block design, you separate the subjects into those blocks. And then randomly assign the treatments within each of those blocks. So actually, where'd my sheet go? One of my students, the first time I did this, said, well, wait a second, if we just block off that, this looks identical to what we have going on up here in completely randomized design. And I'm like, that's exactly the point. Okay, you're doing a completely randomized design within each block. Okay, that's the whole point of doing it. And we'll talk more about why that's going to be important down here later. Matched pairs. Remember, basically, it's a very specialized block form. The experimenter is used to compare two treatments that uses blocks of size 2. So you're saying we're going to make these little tiny blocks, and we're going to have them all kind of paired off. So like we're going to have a high GPA, like in the previous example, super high GPA, almost super high GPA, etc. And we're just splitting them all off and doing it that way. That's also part of the reason why you didn't see the diagram for it. We wrote it out because otherwise you'd have to break up, 15 different ones. It's pandemonium. So two very similar experimental units are paired, and then they're randomly assigned a treatment from within that pair. Now, again, down here, we've got an experiment, check your understanding. So hit pause. We'll come back and talk about it. Researchers would like to design an experiment to compare the effectiveness of 3 different advertisements for a new television series featuring the works of Jane Austen. So again, this is just another way of saying, hey, you can use stats in this anywhere. So you're going to go into marketing, guess what? Yeah. So 3 different advertisements, that's important. And then there's also 300 different volunteers. That's going to be important to know. The first thing that you're asked to do is design a completely randomized design to compare the effectiveness of those 3 advertisements. So that is what I came up with. You have 300 volunteers. We assign them randomly, and again, we know what that would entail. So we have simple random samples. We have one group of 100, a second group of 100, and a third group of 100. The first group gets treatment number 1, which is the first ad. The second group gets the second treatment. That's ad number 2. And then the third group gets the third ad. And then after you do all this, you're going to compare their effectiveness. Now, we'll talk about or allude to how you go about doing that. But we're just for now assuming that there's some way that we can compare how effective they are. All right? And that would actually be a pretty good just standard. Here we go. Now, the second question I think is a little bit more interesting. It says describe a random block design for this. Choose your choice of blocks. And so this you may have had a little bit harder way to do it, but there's only really one way that you could probably block this. Well, I suppose you could do men and women. You could do college educated, all sorts of different things. The one that we picked here, and the one that Stats Medic suggests, is that we're going to take our 300 volunteers and we're going to split them up into 2 groups. Are you familiar with the works of Jane Austen, or are you not familiar with the works of Jane Austen? That would be kind of like me and my wife. My wife, English major here, me, non-English major, I haven't read any of them. No interest, doesn't matter. So, and then within each of those, you're going to do what we did up here. We're going to assign a third of each of those into each group. Why don't we use numbers? Because we don't know how many people out of the 300 are going to be in each of these groups. So a third go into each group, they each see an ad, compare the results, same thing here. Now, why, the third question goes, why is this maybe more preferable to this? One of the things is, before I show you the answer, I will tell you a story. My wife and I were watching television, and an ad came up for this new Jane Austen series that the BBC was doing. And I was intrigued. I'm like, oh, that looks kind of cool. And my wife is like, oh, no way, I can't do it. I'm like, well, why not? And she said something to the effect of, it doesn't seem like it's going to be true to the story, etc. So that reason here, the randomized block is sometimes good because it minimizes the variability of what's going on. Here, if they're all familiar with Jane Austen, the spread may not be as big, because remember, that's what variability does. So it may not be as huge as what you may see if we did it in random. Because you might have people who like Jane Austen and really liked, make sure I'm getting it this mirror for you, really like the ad and can't wait for it. And you may have other people who aren't familiar with this. Or in my case, with that one ad that we saw, I really was kind of intrigued. I'm like, oh, maybe I could watch it. It'd be good. And then my wife was like, there's no way I'm going to watch it at all. Okay. So if you did it in random, you're going to get that bigger spread. Whereas if it was an issue with, like in my wife's case, I don't think it's going to be true to the story. If other people who like Jane Austen had that, then that means that they may be all together in a clump over here for, let's say, ad one. Let's say that was that one. And I really liked ad one and my whole group over here. So you might be able to actually see, hey, ad one was best for this group. Ad three was best for this group. So then that way you can kind of target things out that way, which is also part of the reason why I like with political campaigns, how certain ads get targeted towards certain television channels. If you've ever watched Game Show Network, lots of things that retirees would go after. Why? Because they tend to like those types of shows? I don't know. So anyway, that is the end of section 4.2, designing of experiments. Hope you learned something. Good luck on your quiz. If you have any questions, drop me a line below. See you soon.